members that the clerk of the committee can only receive motions for the election of the chair. The clerk cannot receive other types of motions, cannot entertain points of order, or participate in debate. We can now proceed to the election of the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 106-2, the chair must be a member of the government party. I am ready to receive motions, and if you please just unmute and say that you have a motion.
Chair, I have a motion, please.
Ms. Cusey?
Yes, thank you. I would like to nominate Mr. Vance Badaway as the chair of this committee, please.
Sounds good. Thank you. So it has been moved by Ms. Cusey that Mr. Vance Badaway be elected as chair of the committee. Are there any further motions for the position of chair? Seeing none, I declare the motion carried and Mr. Badaway duly elected chair of the committee. Mr. Badaway, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, committee.
And I invite you to take the virtual chair now.
Okay, we're here. Now, Madam Clerk, did you want to proceed with the election of vice chairs, or would you like me to proceed with that?
I can certainly do so if that's the wish of the committee.
Okay. Committee members, if the clerk can continue with the motion to accept for vice chair, that's fine. Okay, Mary France, go ahead.
Sounds great. So pursuant to Standing Order 106-2, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now ready to receive motions for the first vice chair. Oh, Ms. Jaczek?
Yes, I would like to nominate Ms. Stephanie Kuzi.
Sounds great. It has been moved by Ms. Jaczek that Ms. Cusey be elected as first vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions for the position of first vice chair? Seeing none, I declare the motion carried and Ms. Cusey duly elected as first vice chair of the committee. Congratulations.
Thank you. Merci tout le monde.
And also pursuant to Standing Order 106-2, the second vice chair must be a member of an opposition party other than the official opposition. I am now ready to receive motions for the second vice chair. Oh, I see Mr. El Khoury.
Yes. Je propose Monsieur Duval comme vice-président.
I put forward Mr. Duval as vice chair of the committee. It has been moved by Mr. El Khoury that Mr. Barcelo Duval be elected as second vice chair of the committee. Are there any motions for the second vice chair? Seeing none, is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion? Agreed. Mr. Barcelo Duval, you are duly elected second vice chair of the chair. Congratulations.
Chair, it's back to you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Well done, and congratulations to both vice chairs, Ms. Kuzi and Mr. Barcelo Duval. We're now going to move into the routine motions. We've all received their documents from the clerk's office, and I guess the intent, if I can get the blessing from the committee, is to go through the routine motions one by one, and we can debate them and vote on them one by one. So, do I have a person that wants to start us off? I see Mr. Rogers pop up. Mr. Rogers, floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and congratulations to you being elected chair, and to Ms. Capuzzi and Mr. Barcelo Duval. Looking forward to working with you and all the members of this committee. So the routine motions, I just want to go through a portion of these, and then I'll ask my honorable colleague, Mr. El Khoury, to do some of these in French as well. So the first motion would be the analyst services that the committee retain as needed, and at the discretion of the chair, the service of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist it in its work.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, pardon me. We have no objections to that, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Rogers, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? No, I am dependent on the raise hand function, folks. So if you go to participants, you got the raise hand function. I do have it on my screen here, so I'll be able to see the queue. So with no questions, all those in favor of that motion? Opposed? That would be carried. Mr. Rogers?
And the next routine motion would be that the subcommittee on agenda and procedure be established and be composed of 5 members, the chair, 1 member from each party, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Any questions to that motion? Mr. Bachrach?
I'd like to propose an amendment, if that's in order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So that is to insert the word recognized after the word each, so that it would read 1 member from each recognized party.
To that amendment, members, any questions or comments? All those in favor to the amendment? Opposed? That will be carried. Back to the motion as amended. Any further questions or comments? With none, all those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Mr. Rogers?
That the chair be authorized to hold meetings, to receive evidence, and to have that evidence printed when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 2 members of the opposition and 2 members of the government, and that when traveling outside the parliamentary precinct, the meeting begin after 15 minutes, regardless of members present.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Any questions or comments to that motion? With none, all those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Mr. Rogers?
Time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. That the witness be given, that the witness be given 10 minutes for their opening statement. That at the discretion of the chair, during the questioning of witnesses, there be allocated 6 minutes for the first question of each party, as follows for the first round: the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, the Bloc Québécois, the New Democratic Party. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for the questioning be as follows: Conservative Party 5 minutes, Liberal Party 5 minutes, Conservative Party 5 minutes, Liberal Party 5 minutes, the Bloc Québécois 2.5 minutes, and the New Democratic Party 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I have 2 questions that came up. First off, I have Mr. Bachrach, followed by Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the routine motion beginning with that witnesses be given 10 minutes for their opening statements. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct. Yes.
So I would move an amendment. So there are 2 parts to this amendment. So first, I would move that the wording be changed to that witnesses be given 5 minutes for their opening statements, that whenever possible, witnesses provide the committee with their opening statement 72 hours in advance, that at the discretion of the chair, et cetera, as written. So that's the first part of the amendment. The second part of the amendment is concerning the order. I would amend that the wording be changed to, for the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows: Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party, 5 minutes, Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes, New Democratic Party, 2.5 minutes, Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. To that amendment, questions or comments? Mr. Barcelou-Duval, did you have a question to the amendment?
Non, j'appuie totalement l'amendement.
No, I support the amendment and no questions. Thank you.
No questions to the amendment, parts 1 and 2. All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you. Mr. Barcelou-Duval,
Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
the amended motion. You're fine, Mr. Barcelou-Duval?
Oui, désolé, il y a
Yeah, sorry, there was a delay with interpretation. I could not hear you properly. But I completely agree with this. The reason why I raised my hand, and maybe we can discuss that after the vote. May be better asked to the clerk. I have a proposal to make later on.
Mr. Barcelo Duval. So to the main motion, any questions or comments further? As the motion as amended, all those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
The next one is document distribution, that only the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee, and only when the documents are available in both official languages, and that witnesses be advised accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Any questions or comments to that motion? All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
The next one is working meals, the title, that the clerk of the committee be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittees.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Any questions or comments? No questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
For travel accommodations and living expenses of witnesses, that if requested, a reasonable travel accommodation and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses, not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, and that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Mr. Alkuri.
And congratulations to the next chair and to all members. I believe we're going to have a good job. I start accès aux réunions à huis clos, que à moins que l'on soit ordonné autrement. Chaque
Transcripts for in-camera meetings, that one copy of the transcript of each in-camera meeting, be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff.
For the motion, I'm hearing through translation both the speaker, Mr. Alkuri, as well as the translator at the same time. Is there any way that translation can turn the volume down on the speaker when we're trying to listen to it translated in English? I'm not sure if I'm the only one. Is everybody else getting
thanks,
that too?
Mr. Speaker. I was about to make the same intervention, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. So to the translators, if you wanted to comment on that. Interpretation.
Well, the interpreter. Okay.
It may be due because Mr. Alkuri is not on the right channel, or I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
Monsieur Alkuri.
So thank you, Madam Clerk. So when speaking, folks, if you can go down to the interpretation part of the toolbar on the bottom and press it, and if in fact you're going to be speaking French, if you can press French, and if you're going to be speaking English, if you can press English. And that way we can hear it loud and clear. I'm ready.
Mais je suis en français.
But I'm on the French channel.
Motion that you had just presented. Any questions or comments to that motion? With none, all those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Mr. Alkuri, the floor is yours.
Merci.
Thank you. Transcripts of in-camera meetings. That one copy of the transcript of each in-camera meeting be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff.
Thank you, Mr. Alkuri. Questions or comments to this motion? All those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Mr. Alkuri.
Avis de motion.
Notice of motion that 48 hours notice interpreted as 2 nights shall be required for any substantive motion to be considered by the committee unless the substantive motions relate directly to business then under consideration, provided that 1, the notice be filed with the clerk of the committee no later than 4 o'clock from Monday to Friday, that 2, the motion be distributed to members in both official languages by the clerk on the same day the said notice was transmitted if it was received to no later than the deadline hour, and that 3, notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days be deemed to have been received during the next business day, and that when committee is traveling on official business, no substantive motions may be moved.
Carry. Are there any questions or comments to this motion? With none, all those in favor? Opposed? That will be carried. Mr. Alcuri?
Mr. Chair, can I point of order?
Sure you can, Mr. Bachrach. Go ahead.
When Mr. Alcuri's translation was not working, I'm concerned that there was a motion that was either skipped or there was one that was read twice, and I just wanted to confirm, perhaps with the clerk, that we covered access to in-camera meetings as well as transcripts of in-camera meetings.
Madam Clerk?
Et avis de motion.
Sorry, I was muted there. Yes, we did cover both.
Great. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Alcuri?
Ordre de renvoi reçu.
Orders of reference from the House requesting bills. That in relation to orders of reference from the House respecting bills, the clerk of the committee shall, upon the committee receiving such an order of reference, write to each member who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee to invite those members to file with the clerk of the committee in both official languages any amendments to the bill which is the subject of the said order, which they would suggest that the committee consider. B. Suggested amendments filed pursuant to paragraph A at least 48 hours prior to the start of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill to which the amendments relate shall be deemed to be proposed during the said consideration, provided that the committee may, by motion, vary this deadline in request of a given bill, and C. During the clause-by-clause consideration of a bill, the chair shall allow a member who filed suggested amendments pursuant to paragraph A an opportunity to make brief representations in support of them.
Mr. Alcuri, are there any questions or comments to this motion? With none, all those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. So, Madam Clerk, I believe we covered all the routine motions.
Absolutely. It's up to the committee to decide if there are any other motions that they want to have adopted as routine motions as well.
Mr.
Great.
Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Sadhu. Go ahead. And I have Mr. Bachrach following him.
Sorry, I don't have a routine motion. I had a regular motion, but I'll talk about that once we're done routine.
Okay, Mr. Bachrach, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there were 3 routine motions that were carried last time that did not appear in the list that was just read out. So at the pleasure of the chair, I would like to move them one at a time, if that would be in order.
Go ahead, Mr. Bachrach.
Okay, so the first one is that any motion to go in camera should be debatable and amendable, and that the committee may only meet in camera for the following purposes. A, to discuss administrative matters of the committee. B, to draft a report. C, briefings concerning national security. And D, for any other reason with the unanimous consent of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Are there any questions to that motion? Mr. Biddle?
Sorry, I could get my hand up faster than I can get to the mute button. I raised some my only concern about this motion is the unanimous consent motion, and I'm in agreement that we should our priority should be to be open to the public and debate to be there. But I'm just going back to my time served on PROC, and I believe Ms. Kuzi might have been there during that time. And I know we dealt with a number of issues, not related to national security. We dealt with issues related to security of the House. We dealt with issues related to collective agreements. We dealt with and other issues that could come up, like business confidences and those types of issues that don't fall in necessarily to that list. And I worry that one member, be it a government member or an opposition member, may be able to stifle an opportunity to hear from a witness. I also remember one witness from PROC who was a member of the Ottawa Police Force who just didn't want his identity to be acknowledged. It was an issue of his own security and his family's security. And I don't know if we run into those issues, but if we narrow it too much and give an opportunity for one member to scuttle the opportunity to hear from a witness, that really limits our opportunity to debate, especially if it's on a particular issue of importance that's before the committee. We may have very specific instances, and I did bring up that Ottawa police officer on hate crime that might have been before Ms. Kuzi joined our committee. We dealt with the collective bargaining agreements of the Parliamentary Protective Service. We dealt with legal issues before the committee. So there's more that can come up just than that point, and my worry is any one member can stop a witness from appearing if it comes up. I see Mr. Bachrach has a response, so I'll stop talking for now.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Mr. Bachrach?
If I recall the debate that we had last time we considered the routine motions, item D was added on to address the concern that there may be situations arising that are not covered under the first 3 points, and that the committee agrees unanimously should be considered in camera. The intent of this motion is to err on the side of transparency, which I know is a value that everyone on this committee holds. And so what we don't want is the in-camera provisions to be used to for the consideration of testimony that might be embarrassing or for some reason that members may not want it in a public meeting. So if what Mr. Biddle is suggesting is that we remove item D so that unanimous consent is not a part of the motion, I think that would be fine. It does make the motion more limiting, and then to go in camera, an item would have to fall under one of the first 3 criteria. But if I understand where he's coming from, I would be happy to remove item D.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Any further questions or comments? Mr. Biddle?
Just to go further on, like this isn't necessarily a motion that I've seen before in other committees. That doesn't necessarily that's not necessarily a bad thing that we haven't seen it before in other committees, and doesn't necessarily make it valid. I think that we would keep, if we're going to have this motion, I think D should remain in it. I guess I'm questioning the necessity for the motion, especially with the government in the minority. There's very little that I think that would be the worry that the governing members of the governing party were trying to silence a particular debate. It's weird to hear the doorbell during a committee meeting, but I guess that's COVID debating. But I guess I would be opposed to amendment of the motion as a whole. I guess I'm questioning the necessity for the motion in its entirety. That in my experience, even in a when we held the majority, there was general agreement on, there was lack of a desire to push things into an in-camera debate, and that the committee was a good arbiter of what that was on any given time. But that's just from my experience in putting it out there. So if the committee, obviously, if the committee wants this, I'd like to hear from the other opposition parties and their thoughts on it. If they want it, I'm not going to move to amend it any further, but I guess I question the rationale for it.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. I have Mrs. Kuzi, then followed by Mr. Barcelou-Duval. Mrs. Kuzi?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't know. I lean towards having it, and it's because the motion, it states in the motion that it's always debatable and amendable, and I absolutely agree with my NDP colleague that whatever we do should be in support of transparency within the committee. I would prefer to see the motion remain, and I would prefer to see it remain in the format that exists, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kuzi. Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Peut-être un...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe one point of information. Does the clerk know if we don't pass this motion, how would this work? Would it be up to the chair of the committee to decide?
Oui, bonjour, merci pour la question.
Thank you for this question. Usually, without this motion, it would be the majority of the committee who would decide. The difference there, it would be a majority, and here it's unanimous consent in this motion. Yes, I'm happy with the motion. I like to have the principle that we will be sitting in public most of the time. But unless I haven't heard any arguments for anything else, really.
Any further questions or comments on the motion? With none, all those in favor of the motion? Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Any further questions or comments on the...
Oh, Mr. Chair, I have two more, if you will.
Go ahead.
So the first one is that whenever a minister appears before the committee, every effort be made to ensure that the meeting is televised.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Any questions or comments on that motion? With none, all those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My final motion is that all requests to appear before the committee be distributed to the committee members, and that all briefing materials submitted to the clerk be distributed to the committee members.
Any questions or comments on that motion? All those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Are there any other comments or questions or motions to the routine motions? With none, we'll move on. Thanks, everybody. That was very good. Mr. Sidhu, you had your hand up earlier. You wanted to speak. Mr. Sidhu, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations to you and the vice chairs. I'm not sure how my colleagues would want to proceed. I'm ready to present my motion, but I'm not sure. I watched other committees this morning, the Indigenous Affairs Committee, and they kind of referred to subcommittee. So before I present my motion, I just want to hear what my colleagues have to say before I go forward with it.
Thank you, Mr. Sadu, and I'll get it. I'm going to get to that in a second. I do want to make mention the following: that if members, as you probably already know, would like to say a few words before we begin to ensure an orderly meeting, that if you have a motion to move, please unmute yourself and state that you would like to move a motion, as you have throughout this meeting. You may also raise a point of order at any time during the meeting by unmuting yourself and stating that you have a point of order. Once a motion is moved or a point of order is raised, please use the raise hand function to indicate that you wish to be included on the speakers list. I will be keeping an eye on that. I have 3 screens here, so that's one of my screens, which has probably got all my attention. Or it does have all my attention, not probably. And with that, you may do so by clicking on participants, as you know, at the bottom of your screen, pressing the raise hand function. Finally, the motion adopted by the House on September 23rd provides that, except for those decided unanimously or on division, all questions shall be decided by a recorded vote. Therefore, once a motion amendment is moved and there is no more debate, I will ask if there's any or if there's any objections. If you object, please again unmute and say so, and I will then ask the clerk to proceed with a recorded vote. Any questions on that, guys? I think everyone's got that down pat. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Mr. Sadu's comments, asking for the committee's thoughts on how you would like to move forward, whether it be on accepting motions here at this meeting as we move forward past this point, or by giving notice on motions and moving them over to a subcommittee to then discuss at a subcommittee. We did that last time around and it worked quite effectively sometimes. But mostly, for the most part, it allowed the committee of the whole to really deal with the meat on the bone, so to speak, versus debate on the actual motions that we may be entertaining today. So I'm going to ask those here today to again raise hand and discuss that. So I have here. And by the way, please bear with me here, folks, because when I look at the speakers list, it doesn't give me a queue. It just shows me hands. So if I happen to pick somebody that had a hand up before someone else, I apologize. So I do have Mr. Bachrach, Mr. Duval, Barcelona Duval, and Mr. Rogers. Mr. Bachrach, floor is yours.
So I believe when the committee met last time, there were a number of motions that were introduced at those first meetings, and it was without notice and caught some people off guard. My preference, I think, moving forward would be that we have adequate notice given for motions as per the routine motions that we passed, and that the motions perhaps be given notice and then be sent to the subcommittee for prioritization. I know last time there were numerous motions committing us to studies, and we only got through, I believe, the first one. So I'm sure almost every member of this committee has a few in their back pocket, and I do as well. So maybe if we could provide notice at this meeting and then get the subcommittee together at the earliest opportunity, that would be a good way to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. I'll take that as a motion. And with that, any questions to it? I do have Mr. Barcelona Duval and Mr. Rogers on that motion.
Oui, ben écoutez,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this has obviously become a motion, what my NDP colleague was talking about. And I do agree, actually, with his opinion. I think that it should be up to the subcommittee to meet. And that's time that we wouldn't have to necessarily spend on deciding on whether or not these motions go forward. However, I think it would be nice to have an opportunity to table them. I mean, we're here. It's colleagues have already prepared their motions. And I'd be curious, actually, to know what the content of these motions are going to be, what my colleagues have to propose.
Councilor Duval, any further questions on Mr. Bachrach's motion? With none, all those in favor? Opposed? That would be carried. Thank you, Mr. Bachrach, and thank you for your intervention, Mr. Barcelona Duval. Mr. Rogers, you had your hand up as well?
I think, Mr. Chair, that was from a previous vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rogers. So we're gonna go along the line of the motion, and of course the thoughts given and the intervention given by Mr. Barcelou-Duval. So I'm gonna go back to Mr. Sidhu. Mr. Sidhu had his hand up, and I believe his hand was up to put something forward. And as we put those forward, the intent is not to debate, but to give, I guess, for lack of a better word, notice of what the intentions are going to be. And then with that, the full motion and/or a formalized motion can be presented to the clerk. Clerk can then pass that on to the subcommittee, and we can move from there. So with that, I'm going to go to Mr. Sidhu first, and then I have Ms. Kuzi, Mr. Barcelou-Duval, and Mr. Backrack. Mr. Sidhu?
Oh, Chair, point of order quickly.
ahead.
My apologies. Do we need to raise our hand for each motion we're presenting, or is it when we have the floor, do we present the motion, the total sum of the motions that we have prepared?
I would say get right to it.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Chair.
And then we can go from there. So Mr. Sidhu, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the motion that I'd like to present, we know in the transportation sector, labor shortages existed before COVID, and they still exist now. The issue is, we've got a large transportation sector here in Brampton East, a big transportation corridor, and a lot of drivers are scared and reconsidering other careers. We've already got a shortage, so I think this is an important study. So the wording of the motion I have is that the committee undertake a study focusing on current and anticipated labor shortages in the Canadian transportation sector. For example, truck drivers, mariners, maintenance staff, trainers, instructors, and various types of engineers and technicians in the aviation sector. The study would identify the implications of such shortages and look at possible solutions to alleviate problems stemming from them, and that in consultation with the committee members, the chair be empowered to coordinate the resources and scheduling necessary to execute these studies in 6 meetings or fewer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sidhu. I'm now going to go on to Ms. Kuzi.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of motions I'm going to present. The first one is in regards to the main estimates, and the motion, and I'll read it verbatim here, that the committee call upon the Minister of Transport and officials from the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities to discuss the spending priorities outlined in the main estimates, and this meeting occur before November 20th, 2020. So that's my first motion, Mr. Chair. Excellent. And then thank you. I'll move on to my motions for our proposed studies as well, to add to my Liberal colleague. Our first motion is that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of 4 meetings in regard to Transport Canada's aircraft certification process, including but not limited to the nature of Transport Canada's relationship to the Federal Aviation Administration and other certifying bodies, as well as the role of airplane manufacturers in the certification process, that the evidence and documentation received by the committee during the first session of the 43rd Parliament on the subject be taken into consideration by the committee in the current session, that the committee completes its study by November 27th, 2020, and that the committee present its findings and recommendations to the House. So, Mr. Chair, this is just to complete the study that was began prior to proroguing. I believe that Canadians and affected parties, we have an obligation to conclude this study and to make our recommendations. I'll go on to my next motion of study. Le comité permanent de transport de l'infrastructure.
That the Standing Committee undertake a study over 4 meetings of the impact of COVID-19 on the aviation sector, and that the committee report to the House on its
Translation isn't working again, or perhaps Ms. Kuzi, you're on the wrong channel?
I am on the wrong channel. My apologies. In my attempt to work in both official languages, I did not put it on the correct channel here. So I will now attempt to put it on the right channel, which is interpretation, and I will put it to French. Oui, parfait, Martin.
Right, thank you. So I will start over. That the Standing Committee on Transportation undertake a study over 4 meetings of the impact of COVID-19 on the aviation sector, and that the committee report its recommendations to the House, including its conclusions. I'm going to continue with another motion.
The Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities undertake a study on rapid testing for COVID-19 in the transportation sector, and that the committee reports its findings, including its recommendations to the House and the government respond to the committee's recommendations. Oh, one moment, please. I'm just going to check on that one. My apologies for the delay here.
Ms. Kuzi, would you like me to come back to you?
Nope, that's fine. I've
Okay,
got it right here, sure. No, that's correct, yes. Pardon me, I'll repeat that one again, that the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities undertake a study on rapid testing for COVID-19 in the transportation sector, and that the government reports its findings, including its recommendations to the House, and the government respond to the committee's recommendations. My fourth one is the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities undertake a study as to the impact of COVID-19 on supply chains, particularly supply chains involving aviation, shipping, and that the committee reports its findings, including recommendations to the House. And my final one is the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities undertake a study on the proposed Alaska to Alberta Railway, and that the committee reports its findings, including the recommendations to the House. Those conclude my motions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kuzi. I'm now going to go to I have Mr. Bachrach. I have Mr. Barcelou-Duval. I have Mr. Rogers, Mr. Biddle, and Ms. Jazek. Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 motions for which I would like to provide notice. The first one relates to infrastructure funding, that the committee commit to undertake a study related to the mandate and activities of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, including a review of the projects that the bank has supported and possible alternative mechanisms for funding comparable projects, and that no fewer than 4 meetings be set aside for the study.
Thank you.
The second motion relates to the Investing in Canada plan and the climate lens. And the motion reads that the committee commit to undertake a study related to the implementation and effectiveness of the climate lens requirement to Infrastructure Canada's Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, its Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, DMAF, and its Smart Cities Challenge, and that no fewer than 4 meetings be set aside for the study.
Excuse me, point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Curry.
Yes, just to bring to your attention that I raised my hand, but I did not hear my name on the roll.
Yeah, I have you here. Mr. Curry, I got you here and in the queue. No problem. Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The third and final motion relates to broadband infrastructure, that the committee commit to undertake a study related to the implementation and effectiveness of Government of Canada programs to support high-speed internet and cell infrastructure in rural, remote, and northern communities, and that no fewer than 4 meetings be set aside for the study.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also have 4 motions that I would like to give notice for, and perhaps the clerk could let me know that she received them, because I had heard actually that the clerk was someone else, so I'm not sure that the clerk actually received my information. So if the clerk did not receive these motions, I will send them in. Now, in terms of my first motion, I would like the committee under pursuant to Standing Order 1082 that the committee undertake a study on the sale of Air Transat and its impact on air travel in Canada, that it fully examine the situation and that an order be made for any reports and or any notes, any memoranda regarding Air Canada and Air Transat, and that they be submitted within 15 days after this motion is adopted. So obviously, this is a motion about the sale of Air Transat, and this has had an important impact on competition. The Minister of Transport actually even acknowledged this. And there has been discussion about public interest. My second motion, and I'll also read that one, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of the regional issues related to air travel, given that Air Canada has withdrawn from certain areas, and that the committee examine other alternatives and solutions that meet the needs of the population in the region affected by the withdrawal of these services, and that the committee report its findings to the House. So this has to do, obviously, with the cuts in services to regions. These are significant cuts, and I think it's important that we look at the long-term impacts of this. These issues existed before COVID and have only become worse because of COVID. Okay. My next motion would be pursuant to Standing Order 1082 of the committee, of the Standing Order, rather, the committee undertake a study on the issue of reimbursing tickets during the pandemic, and that the Minister of Transport put in place directives that align with consumer rights, and that the committee then report its findings and recommendations to the House. So this obviously is a motion about travel credits and about the many, many tickets that were not reimbursed, and the refusal of airlines actually to reimburse those individuals who ended up losing a fair amount of money. And my last motion, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of the government measures and policies on the electrification of transportation and proposals for improvement, and that the committee report its findings to the House. I think the motion speaks for itself. Thank you very much for having given me the time to present those motions.
I'm now going to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a motion which relates to identifying innovative technology and solutions for cargo delivery in northern, rural, and remote communities. That the committee commit to undertake a study focusing on the role that innovative technologies such as drones or the latest generation of airships can play in delivering cargo to northern and remote communities that are challenging to service during using existing transportation infrastructure. And that, in consultation with the committee members, the chair be empowered to coordinate the resources and scheduling necessary to execute these studies in 6 meetings or fewer. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I now have Mr. Biddle, Ms. Jazik, and Mr. Alcuri. Mr. Biddle.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My motion is fairly similar to one of the motions brought forward by Ms. Kuzi, so hopefully the subcommittee will be able to merge these together if the committee deems it a priority, but that'd be a general study, a little bit broader than what Ms. Kuzi discussed, but a study of biosecurity in the transportation sector. That the committee undertake a study focusing on the role that innovative biotechnology, for example, temperature screening, retinal scans, face recognition, can play in improving safety and security of our transportation sector, including increasing public confidence in said sector, and that in consultation with the committee members, the chair, be empowered to coordinate the resources of scheduling necessary to execute these studies in 6 meetings or fewer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Ms. Jazik.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's certainly nice to see such enthusiasm for so many different studies coming from members of the committee. Our committee, of course, is Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, and my motion addresses particularly infrastructure and communities. So the motion is that the committee undertake a study on the ability of targeted infrastructure investment to influence social, economic and environmental outcomes and improve the lives of Canadians in underserved and vulnerable communities, that the committee examine the socioeconomic profile of where infrastructure funding has flowed historically, and that the committee study best practices in Canada and abroad for ensuring infrastructure investments reach communities most in need.
Mr. Alkiri.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I have a motion to submit that the committee commits to do a study on industrial capacity in the construction sector to determine how much investment can be introduced in the Canadian economy each year to ensure full employment in the construction sector and related supply chains, how to obtain maximum profitability for these investments without creating unjustified inflation for the cost of products. The study would focus on the capacity of current training programs and commitments made by all levels of government to increase capacity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Alkiri. Are there any further questions, comments, motions? Is there any further business? Madam Clerk, any comments?
No, thank you. I did receive the motions from Monsieur Barcelo-Duval, and what I can do is I can distribute to all members all the motions in both official languages.
Thank you. And it will be my intent to secure a date for a subcommittee meeting. We haven't received any indication from our whips nor from the clerk that there is a future meeting scheduled, but I do believe we can take that opportunity, therefore, to schedule a subcommittee. Question I have to members is the makeup of the subcommittee itself. Madam Clerk, the last time around, our subcommittee was made up, I believe, of all parties. If you can confirm that.
Yes, absolutely. So we just adopted the routine motion saying that it should be a member of all recognized parties and that it be 5 members. And normally I confirm with the whips as to who exactly would be the member for the subcommittee.
Wonderful. Are there any questions or comments on that? We're all good? Okay, so with no further business being before us, I will now adjourn this meeting. Folks, thank you. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, all.
Eventually.